Hey gang, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company. It's a podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm a Keegan voice. Today I spoke with Vaughn McKenzie-Landell. McKenzie-Landell is the founder of Butter, the protocol for DAO governance. That's DAO as in decentralized autonomous organization. In the past, he was an aspiring singer who ultimately chose a career in technology, eventually merging the two to focus on how the latter can be used to disrupt the walled garden that surrounds the former. He built a company called JAAK and is now rallying and run a new project called Juice. We chatted about these endeavors, about learning Japanese, about how to better capture and allocate value in music, and a great many other things. Hope you all enjoyed the conversation. Here we go. Right, hey Vaughn, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
I like to start at the beginning and just hear a little bit more about you, where you're from, your origins, and the beginning of your relationship with music.
I always had this in my head that I was going to be a singer. So I, from very early on, I would sing a lot and would make songs with family members. Most particularly, and he features heavily in the story, is my older cousin Curtis, who started producing music on his PlayStation. So when I was trying to play Worms or Tekken, he would tell me, he'd say, "No, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to buy the PlayStation magazine, which comes with a demo because they have like a new, a new beat maker software on there. I don't know what he was playing with." So anyway, so we started making music that way. I started rapping and all of that, and eventually started singing. And we recorded a demo when we were maybe like 16, maybe a bit younger than that. And we took it to his dad, actually, who worked at Sony, and we got connected to some execs, and it was my first real brush with the actual industry side of music.
Right.
And I remember just not really understanding why they weren't like just giving me money and signing the song. Bear in mind, this was the worst song in the world. They were just really humoring me. So it was really, really interesting. And then after that, I did some work experience at Sony. Funny enough, I worked as in the Vault in Putney here in the UK. And the Vault is basically, you pick up like old master tapes, and you read the copy off the top of it, and then you enter the metadata into a spreadsheet, which basically the digitization of the like physical catalog, which is funny because as I'm sure anyone who knows me knows, that's exactly the problem that I ended up having to tackle, music rights data. So that was kind of my first like step into music. It was starting from like making music and trying to be a singer, then kind of seeing more the industry side and being attracted to that, and then very slowly, very, very slowly letting go of the fact that I was going to be a singer and make music, and moving kind of into a business, the business side of the industry, which I did maybe later when I was in like 19, 20.
Cool. Do you still sing in any capacity?
What's really funny is no, I don't sing. I don't sing like publicly or anything. Obviously, I still really enjoy music, but a few years ago, I decided to start learning Japanese, and I decided the thing to give up was because I feel like I needed some constant influx of Japanese in my life to kind of keep making progress.
Right.
And I picked music. I picked music as the cultural object that I would like swap over from English to Japanese. And what it has done is it has really killed my singing. I don't really sing because most of the songs I know are Japanese songs. They're not songs that are interesting to sing. They're songs that are interesting to learn. So yeah, I don't sing as much, really.
Wow, that's interesting. What made you choose Japanese?
I'd always learned languages. I learned French from a very young age. Then I learned Spanish, and then I got into Japanese kind of accidentally, like just from like being on Duolingo and thinking I want to pick something, and I just want to pick something hard. But then I think it's just before it's a hard language. Yeah, it's like starting from scratch. There's no commonalities. Right. There are commonalities, but they're not obvious. And at least you need to learn new alphabets. So I wanted to pick something that was difficult, that took me to a new part of the world, and I found that Japanese offered that. Plus, I already had these cultural hooks into the language. From like growing up and ingesting lots of Japanese culture through like TV, lots of it imported by the US.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so Nintendo, for example, and
Right, right,
Pokemon and anime and all that stuff. So it
right.
was good, and I loved it. I really loved it. It became like I was excited to learn the language, whereas others I
Mm,
was like it felt like work.
right.
So yeah, so that's why I learned Japanese.
Cool. And as you were bringing over music as like the cultural hallmark that you're going to borrow in order, to 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 facilitate your language learning. I'm curious, like what most notable, pieces of music and artists that you discovered through, that learning process.
So there's an artist immediately comes to mind, and I say that I am a bit of a tiny bit of a weeb here, in that most of the music that I enjoy is tied to anime,
Hmm.
and it's just because I have no other way of accessing the music. So because anime is so accessible, most of it's translated. There's applications you can just download, whereas if you just go to like Japan top five, top 25 in Spotify or top 50, you're not really you're getting like the popular music, like the charts, but it's really hard to
Right.
access like what are people my age listening to or younger people listening to in Japan,
Right. Right.
without learning and reading Japanese. So
Huh.
most of my music culture comes from that. And there's one particular artist who's called Eve, um, who's they have a name for them. They're these artists who don't. It's very Japanese. You can't see them. You never
Hmm.
actually see them. You don't know who they are. But I think every single major anime has a song by this artist. All the new ones, especially.
Cool. I'm curious if you know, like, what is it about, the culture that has a certain value on anonymity or places a certain value on anonymity, especially like, when it comes to music. And I'm curious because it's like when that happens every once in a while, I guess, in like the Western world and Western music cultures, but it's not that common. I'm curious if you can speak to that at all.
I can't. I don't think I can. I think I've just really come across it and found it interesting, and it's not something I see. I think there's lots of elements of Japanese culture that, from the outside, seem strange, and then once you spend a lot of time with them, you kind of stop noticing, I guess, because they
Hmm.
fit in a way that they
Right.
don't in your own culture. And I guess it's always your perspective. But I think so. There's in my textbook there's this section at the end of each lesson called culture notes, and in the
Hmm.
latest one of the sections it says like anime, manga. These are the things that people normally recognize, the food and so on, sushi, and the bottom it just says cosplay. And it's
Hmm.
funny that cosplay is Japanese, in the same way that karaoke is Japanese. They're like
Hmm.
these Japanese concepts that the world has
Right.
just embraced.
Right.
So I think that when we think about like stardom, um, there's a very different understanding of stardom in Japan and also just in other parts of Asia than there is in the West.
Hmm.
And so you have like cosplay, um, you have this I guess they just call them idols.
Hmm.
They're just people who are famous because they're famous.
Right.
They're famous because they're cute.
Yeah.
So you can imagine they've taken the idea of fame and they just have so many versions of it, that we just have this like single idea of celebrity in the West. And I think that's maybe why you can have these anon celebrities and that makes perfect sense. And anon singers, that's fine. Um, yeah, I think that's it. I think it's something to do with this like they've explored the like range of models for stardom, more thoroughly than we have.
I mean, have you noticed? I mean, you're obviously very entrenched in the music industry, and I'm curious if, as you've dived into learning Japanese and gotten closer to the culture, if you've gleaned any insights like into the music industry itself and how it functions, and if there are like key differentiators between the way that you understand the music industry here on this side of the world, compared to the way it operates there.
Yeah, I've got very limited exposure to the I guess like to the Asian music industry. Um, First of all, there's the isolation. So they are very much different communities and they work very differently. I actually got invited to the Golden Melody Awards in 2018, which is the reason I first went to. Um, I think it was the first time, no, second time I've been to Asia, I think. And I went to Taiwan, then I went to Japan, and then to
Cool.
Seoul. And that was incredible. Like it was like someone said, "Oh, that's basically like the Grammys, but in Asia," and that's what
Hmm.
it felt like. But it was very different. It was definitely very different. I think that um, in some ways it's very. it tries to emulate a lot of the Western industry and Western music and Western ideas. And you can hear that when you hear people like when I listen to certain songs like J-Rock.
Mm-hmm.
My fiance will say, "Hey, that sounds like you're listening to like a Sum 41 song." So it's almost like they're emulating music, and it's kind of cool to emulate music even from the past.
Mm.
And then you have, I guess you've seen it now, like with in Korea as well, with like K-pop. There
Mm-hmm.
is this sense that they're perpetuating certain types of music that we seem to have kind of moved on from, or at least we cycle out of them quite quickly. So there is maybe like a youthfulness to Asian music or Asian popular music because I haven't explored it fully. One of the really interesting things though is to go back in time. So I listen to lots of like older Japanese music, and there's some like, I mean, I can only describe it as some absolute bangers. Like they have they have like there's this whole period of time where they were producing music. So there's this band called I think they're called Yellow Magic Orchestra, and they have this song called I think it's the Yellow Magic Orchestra. Yeah, they have this song called Riding, and
Mm.
I love it. It's like the best song ever. And I went to like a climbing gym 2 days ago, and it's like someone was just randomly playing it, but
That's
it's really
cool.
old. It's like I think it's from the 70s, maybe.
Mm.
Like, I might be
Mm-hmm.
fluffing that. But when you go back there, it's interesting because what you hear is you hear music that you recognize because it all sounds like it came from a game. Sounds like you're playing a game in like the
Mm.
90s, and then which again is nostalgic and it feels like
Right,
uniquely
right.
Japanese.
Huh.
And then you also hear like jazz. You hear like soulful music. You hear like
Mm.
reggae. You hear all these songs that you just don't map to Japan.
Yeah.
So I guess that's it. I guess like when I was in Japan, I spent a month out there in April,
Mm.
and I got this like weird connection between Japan and Sweden, which is one of when I was first learning about songwriting, I was always told, "Oh, the Swedes are great songwriters. They write some of the best pop songs in the world."
Right.
And the reason why they're great is because that they're like they tie, I think, with the Netherlands, but they're like the best English speakers that are non-English, the best
Mm.
non-English English speakers basically in the
Right.
world. And that means that it's not their first language, so that but they know it really well, so they are willing to make connections in with the words that as an English speaker you wouldn't.
Mm.
They would be strange words to connect, but they'll
Right,
make that
right.
connection, and they won't feel bad about it. They'll just make it. And so there's this kind of like buoyancy and letheness to their music. It's kind of it's bouncy. It's kind of free and youthful. And I think that about
Right.
Japan in its production, and this is going to sound really weird, but its production of fakes and copies. So you could say that Japan produces lots of. So you might go into a nice place like a restaurant, and they have like stone on the walls, and the stone is clearly fake and plastic, but it looks very very good. And it's like they're
Mm.
okay with that. And I think that with the same as like cosplay, it's like I'm okay looking like a fake version of this cartoon character, and that's fine. I'm okay having this like kind of like facade. It's like it's fine. That's absolutely okay. So I guess for me, it's something like that. It's like it's okay being a bit weird. It's okay being a bit out there, and it's okay doing things that maybe might seem a bit too youthful for my age.
Oh, that's a really interesting thought. Yeah, I love the comparison to Sweden as well. Yeah, sort of brought to mind, similar thing. My partner is from Brazil, and the way that she uses, some English words or connects, different phrases, they feel very poetic sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, and I love that idea of that in order to create something that is perhaps more profound, more playful, more buoyant, as you said, it takes like one level removed, from sort of the primitive, I guess, which is the language in this in this way to like really coalesce it with other things and create really interesting things. Um, I'm curious going back to when you decided that you were going to stop making music,
Hmm.
and you transitioned. You said you went to Sony and you didn't understand like why they weren't signing you and paying you a bunch of money, and then and then and then suddenly you were working, like doing some work for Sony. And I'm curious, like how that transition happened and how it felt.
The decision to stop doing music came a lot later. But
Mm.
the first one was like making music with Curtis, putting the song to the label saying, "Oh, this is really nice," and then me expecting, okay, and then when's the check coming? When do we let's do this? Oh, that's not how it works. So that was the first foray, and then I think later on, as I got better at making music, we became a bit more organized. We organized into a production group. It's called the Arcade. And then over time, I think we got very good. We would send music out. Actually, we got songs cut by other people. Like most famously, had a song that got a response from like Chris Brown's management, and then they they tried to call me, and they said, "Why can't we call you?" And I said, "Oh, my number's English." And then I never heard from them again, which was quite strange.
Yeah, that's strange.
It was strange. And I guess like I decided I was going to go into other things. I was going like professionally, I was going into investing and finance, and that's where I went to go and study. And I'd always assumed that would be my main thing. And I also got really into building like applications, websites, and I ran a small business selling ebooks online when I was 15 through till I was like 17. So it kind of that was the path I was on. But music was like really dominating most of my time. Oh, and then when I was at school, you have to do work experience, and that was that I just went to my uncle and I said I'd love to come and work and just see what it's like to work in the music industry. And like after looking at boxes of master tapes for like 2 weeks, I said, yeah, I don't think I ever need to come and work for Sony. And there the die was cast. I was never going to work in the music industry. So, but it was much later actually. It was after spending time trying to build startups. Like I'd kind of tried this a couple of times, and I was always finding this tension between over here doing like tech and then over here doing music, and thinking like, why am I splitting myself? I always felt like I was two different people. And then what ended up happening was one day I realized like I have to pick one, and I picked business and tech. I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur, and the reason was quite simple. I felt like as a musician, this is probably true for business as well, but I was born with a natural limit because I wanted to sing. And I think I could maybe, let's say, just to like thumb in the air, maybe finger in the air, I could maybe get to like, I could maybe improve as a songwriter by like 50%, maybe I could improve, but singing was kind of topped out. Like I was never going to be like a Beyonce, Michael Jackson, like some incredible vocalist.
Right.
So I thought, but business, I felt like I didn't really have that same limit. I felt there were so many avenues that I could kind of go anywhere. So picked business, and I think that was a good decision. And later on, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but it took me quite a few iterations of building startups to realize I could build a music startup. I was like, oh, I could do music and business. And
there's an intersection here.
There's literally a whole set of things there, and I really just bumped into that. I my co-founder and I at the time, the co-founder of JAAK, we would often share music. We'd work on tech projects together, and then we'd share music a lot. And then we said, hey, let's build this very simple app, and it was like a music app, and there we were, like building music software. And that was, I guess, the first time I realized, hey, I could actually do a music business. So that was the journey, and it was quite a like a full circle, like sigh of relief, like light switch, the light switch went off, and I was like, oh, I can actually do something that satisfies both of these needs.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, it's still quite a large divide between making music and being part of the industry, but there is inevitably this like huge overlap that does exist, that both kind of both sides have to cross to meet one another. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about like why you created JAAK, what that was, and how that evolved, and then where you went from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we were really just sending music back and forth. Me and my co-founder at the time, which we were just friends, and because we used to work on these kind of small projects, we started thinking, hey, we could just have an app that helps us do this, which is just sharing. And it was almost this realization that we're using SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify. We're sharing songs with each other on like WhatsApp or whatever. And it's like, why is there no sharing functionality? And I think at the time there kind of was, like, I think Spotify used to have one, SoundCloud had one, and they just like got rid of it, which seemed like the weirdest thing ever. Why would you just get rid of the share functionality or send to your friend?
Right.
And so we thought about an app which was called JAAK, which was the idea that you had like a headphone jack. Imagine you could grab anyone's headphone jack and just plug it into the music you were listening to.
Mm-hmm.
That was the idea, and so we came up with this prototype for that, and we took it again to an exec. I think this one was at Warner this time, and we showed them, and we kind of described this system where you would share music with people, and as you share music with them, if it ended up in any kind of economic transaction, like a purchase or maybe a stream, there would be some money that would flow back to the person that initially introduced you to the song. And it was kind of like having a decentralized network of A&Rs, right? Just always like finding music, sending it to people. And which kind of made sense because that's really the way that music does spread. It still spreads person to person.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the idea. And when we kind of shared this with this exec at Warner, he kind of said, "Oh, that's a really good idea." And I think it'll be maybe surprising for you to know that we don't really have a really good system for doing this ourselves, for all artists, all like writers and songwriters and so on. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of that. I never thought about how the music industry pays pays artists or pays songwriters. And you know what's really funny? I think if you speak to lots of people who make music and you ask them how they get paid, even if they're already getting paid, they probably wouldn't know. And I think lots of people have released music as well, or they've written songs that have been played places when they're technically owed money, and they've like never heard of like PRS or ASCAP or BMI. Then, and I think even I, having put music out there, not saying that it has earned money, but there's definitely have written songs that are like on Spotify or like on YouTube, and I think you just expect the money just ends up in your bank account.
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't know, I get paid. Like, well, who's paying me? So that was the first time I'd ever really thought about it. Oh yeah, there must be a whole industry that's paying people, and I wonder how it works. So we spent a bit more time understanding that industry, and then we decided to pivot away from building this music app for consumers or for people sharing music into something that was much more just focused on this like routing of payments to people who need to get paid in music. And we were using a blockchain designed to do that, and so we decided to build like a blockchain network to capture all the data, so you could do this. And that was the idea. And in theory, it's fairly straightforward, right? You have all the information, you store it you can store it in a database. You don't even need to store it on chain. But it's nice if you store it on chain because your data network is also your information network where you store the data is also the place where you store the payments and you make the payments. So it's one system. And just from that, you could argue that it's a good system to use.
Right.
So it's obviously not as straightforward as that. But that was the idea. And then we ran into the industry, which is like the reality. Like that's hard to do. You can't go from system A to system B. You have to think about the A to B part, and that's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
So that was it. That was kind of where we got to with JAAK. And so the rest of the story is JAAK is just trying to figure out how to do that A to B transition. And I think the thing that I always think about it like this. I always think about have you heard of like a local maxima? Like you're searching through this this space trying to find out where the best position is to be, like the highest up that you could be in this field. But you have no eyes, right? So you're searching around. So you reach this top and you're like, I'm at the top, and that's maybe where the industry is. And to get to the next maximum, you have to go uphill. There's like an uphill battle. But once you're at the top, then you have like you're in a better position. And I think about this in terms of the music industry, that we really needed an incentive for most people to move to the new position, adopt the new technology, even if the technology was just another database with all the data in it and all the payments sorted out. And I just felt like we never really had a strong incentive. There was never really enough of an incentive for anybody to move from their existing position to a new position. That even if, and I think the way I described it was it was never in anybody's individual interest, but it was in everyone's collective interest. But the collective doesn't have a bank account or an email address,
unfortunately.
Yeah. That was the downside.
What were some of the incentives that you were playing with that you hypothesized might be effective?
One of them was actually communicated externally to me. Someone called me up. I say called me up, was connected to me. He's a founder of another company, and I wouldn't want to name him just because he might not want to be named. And he just said, Vaughn, just pay them. Get enough money and just pay them, and then they'll give you what you want. You don't need to try and be friends with them. You can just pay them and they'll just take the money. And I guess that's the first one, which was we were trying to use token-based incentives. That was the idea. And I think that the music industry was actually quite interested in that because at the time you had lots of interest around cryptocurrencies, and the music industry has obviously been on the wrong side of new technology developments over time, and so they wanted to be on the right side of that. So they were interested. They certainly didn't want it to pass them by, and I think we were really like a friendly face trying to help them get there, which is exactly what we wanted to do. We said we needed to be on the same side as them to get them over, rather than being antagonistic to them. But to be honest, at the time, and what's funny is in a different world that might have worked because we were basically planning to sell, to do this, take this process where we'd actually like have a token and we would like sell a token, and then this was just before the whole market changed, and there was this change from the SEC that you couldn't basically do anything in the US, and so as soon as that was the case, we just stopped it. We was like, there's no way, there's no token. You can't do a token. There's no clarity or regulatory clarity. It's too much risk, and that really just slowly got rid of that incentive. And we just found that there was nothing else to really replace it. You say that it's going to be better like cheaper software, or maybe you don't even have to pay for the software. There's going to be less politics. There's going to be cleaner data. There's going to be maybe even find money that you lost. All of those, none of those things are that interesting to anybody. And I think that's what you find even today. It's like they're not that interesting. And I kind of feel like the truth is there's like three truths that you learn. And I think the first one is obviously that the most of the money is earned by like a small amount of the catalog. And that stuff, unless it has like real conflicts, like where people are raising issues, like it's kind of clean. Like it's clean enough. Like I'm thinking about like the Ed Sheeran music and stuff like that. It's like it's clean enough. There's no real problems there. And the second part is like it's kind of an impossible problem to solve because you have new people joining the music industry all the time, producing music, and you might have this perfect data set. All it takes is for me and you to make a song, push it into something, and not put data on it, not put any metadata on it, and you've ruined the whole system, right? So like this endless cleanup job.
Idiots.
Yeah, what are you guys doing? I just cleaned up this place. So there's that, and then I think the other one was I always got the sense that I kind of got the sense over time that there was a bit of misdirection happening where you have everyone who's involved in the industry kind of saying, here are the problems are over here. And they focus everybody's attention on these problems, which they are definitely valid problems, but they're not. If you look at you're trying to build a business case internally, they're like not problems. The main problem is that the music industry needs to grow and people need to pay more for music. And mostly those things happen because of things that aren't really to do with the industry. They're to do with like consumer tastes and changes in consumer behavior, technology companies building new ways to reach consumers, and the industry just sits there really and just like it benefits or gets injured by those changes, but it doesn't really have much agency to change them. And so I feel like in the interim, it kind of points and says, these are all these problems that we're focusing on, that we're solving, and so on, which I think is like, those are the big three things I realized over time. So I felt like it wasn't really a problem. I was like, I don't think actually there is a metadata problem. I don't know if there's anything to solve there. So that was it. I always feel like it was a 5% problem when we were looking for like a 500% problem.
Right.
That's kind of my learning, and where we ended up with JAAK was we realized that we didn't really have the interest we expected. We weren't getting our contracts signed to kind of give us the rights to operate the platform. And so we pivoted and ultimately found a good pivot, found a new business, actually, a new business model that we felt was viable. But given the climate at the time, this is 2018, 2019, it's actually quite prescient that we did this because COVID was soon to come. We decided to shut down rather than trying to go out and raise more money and try and build another project.
So I'm curious if these key learnings, these key takeaways from your experience in your observations of the industry and the problems and or non-problems that existed. How has that understanding evolved over the past few years since COVID, since a couple crypto winters.
I think it's evolved. It's definitely evolved a lot just from watching, just observing new teams, new people, new ideas come into the kind of music Web3 industry, and definitely music in general, but mostly music Web3. I've had a firsthand uh, experience. The music NFT thing really kind of took me by surprise because it was so simple compared to what most of the people were trying to do before. We were trying
Hmm.
to basically use the blockchain as infrastructure to undergird the music industry, and the new entrants just said, hey, how about we just build like new things, let's just have a whole bunch of new stuff that we sell to people and they'll buy it, which did not feel like that was realistic. When I mean, it wasn't realistic when we first got started because there was no NFT market. No one was buying them. No one was buying
Right,
them. They're
right.
too expensive. So that was a real eye opener to me. And I think that the type of person um, that invited into music Web3 was also really interesting because it was a new type of user, a new type
Right.
of consumer, a new type of person or like persona, which we just didn't have at the time. And I always think about these things in terms of carrying weight, which is like this idea of like um, populations have like a carrying weight based on like the resources they have available to them. So if you poisoned half the water in the world, for example, the humans would have to reduce. There would be less humans, right? Carrying weight of
Mm-hmm.
humans is based on the amount of water available. Something ridiculous like that. And I think about that in terms of like certain ideas in music cannot work until you have a larger population of music users or population of people who have wallets, for example. That's
Mm-hmm.
been a big change. That there's more people in crypto, and that means there's more people to to support the ideas that we can come up with and the types of use cases and types of products and services we can build. And that one's been really interesting because it's been slow, but it has kept growing, and that's been a really big surprise to me, just how much that's grown.
Because you mentioned that, one of the takeaways is that just we've kind of hit a cap with how much money is in the industry, and there's only so much you can do, to move that around to various places. And maybe it feels like you're changing something, but, ultimately you're just kind of moving money around from here to there. And, fundamentally the system is staying the same. Does this new persona, this new group of people, does that create a viable path toward increasing, the overall pie, the overall amount of revenue that is coming into the music industry at large?
Yeah, I absolutely think they do that, and I guess this is the core of the thesis that runs through Juice, this idea that I've been working on with Dan Fowler, um, which is that you could think about the music industry as basically being like a captured system. It's a system that really is run by a small group of people, and if you think about if you think about tech, you have VCs who are investing in founders and startups, and the startups have like free reign to build things that they can build legally, basically. And really, the VCs are not opinionated really about how they generate value. They're just saying, please take these resources and go and build something of value. And founders go and they find every nook and cranny, right, where there are customers, and then they give them things that they want. And one of the problems in music is that the labels are the funders, but they also represent the artists. So they have the money, they invest in artists, and the artists go out and produce product, and then they then license the product out. So they're the funders and they're the investors. Sorry, the funders and they're the licensors. They're actually basically they're like they're funding they're building the connections or the economic relationships with customers through retail. And I think that means that there may be so many music consumers out there that would consume other types of goods and services, but they might not want the goods and services that the labels can produce. And for this example, let's just use three products they produce. Let's say it's like licenses, it's let's say it's merch, and then let's say it's like tickets to events, right?
Hmm.
And there could be all kinds of other things that music consumers or other types of consumers might be interested in. If you think about how far music spreads and the types of experiences that use music, and then you think about the value. So the value creation is clearly huge. Music creates a lot of value in the world, but the value capture is like minuscule. Like it's
Right.
ridiculous how
Yeah.
small it is. And I don't think that's because it's just impossible to capture value from music. I think it's because there is a very powerful actor in that system who has only one way of capturing value from music. And no matter what happens, they're going to keep beating that horse. Like that's the way. This is the only way that we're going to make that happen. And I think that's, for me, it feels like every single cycle, you can imagine that there's a potential new way of reorganizing music, or reorganizing the resources required to make music to better serve new types of consumers. And every single time the major labels have the ability to stop that wherever it conflicts with their existing business model. So they do. And I think that's how I think about it, is that there's probably all kinds of innovations that we're just losing. They're just dying out on the edges, because there's someone in the middle who's like, that looks really cool, but we can't say yes to that because that means we're going to lose money every single year.
Right. Lose power. Yeah.
Yeah. And lose power. And it's like, I don't want to enable my own. No one like enables their own downfall. No one would rightfully like chew off their own arm, like for no reason, like unless it was to save their skin. I don't think that they will need to do that. So that's, like self-preservation is like built into all of us, especially companies. So that's my thinking there. I think that's the problem. And I think over time, someone obviously will break through. I said this actually on the Juice podcast, which was like, there's probably this world where like Napster won, wasn't sued. And then we'd all have this very different relationship to music, where music would be abundant and everywhere. But then the problem would be that if it was abundant and everywhere, no one was paying for the music.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then that means that artists would stop making music, right? Because they can't get paid. So then you'd have this problem. You'd be like, okay, we need to find a way to make sure artists get paid. You might have, you can imagine, you might have this like patronage system, right? Maybe that would be the way. So pure altruism. I'm not sure that would be the case at all. But you probably find that so much of the value would drift to like concerts or to merch, and there'll be none in the music, right? But that will never happen, where like that's the main business model of rights holders, is to buy into the rights and then to license those out. So that's kind of what I feel is it's not a bad thing, right? This pays artists, but it's not absolutely not the only way to get artists paid for creating music, and it's absolutely not the only way to serve consumers. It's actually probably the worst way to serve them now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I feel like, the value that's created, by music is huge. Like music is the connective tissue to so many, different peoples, and potentially there's so many, different revenue streams, and when you're thinking economically. And that made me think of this thing that I quoted, or that I wrote down, that you had written in your piece, To Have No Juice, and would love to get into what you're doing with Juice after this. But you wrote the major label paradigm unwittingly constrains innovation in music, forcing teams to play juice games when their energy should be focused on building value for customers. So I would love to dive into what it means to play juice games, and what you're doing with Juice.
Absolutely. Well, the funny thing about that is that the way I phrase that, it makes it seem like juice games are bad. And then I named the actual project Juice, which is like, please come and play juice games, but juice is bad. I think the thing here is like, there's an alignment in tech, kind of, right? Again, this isn't like a completely like hard and fast rule. I think there obviously are situations where this isn't true, but overall, founders are aligned. At least founders are aligned with investors in that they both want to create as much value as possible. And I think that they also are aligned, I guess, in saying they want to capture as much value as possible. But sometimes they might not be aligned because that might conflict with the users or consumers of whatever they've built, right? Because they're capturing value from the user. In music, I think that the labels aren't really completely aligned with the artists. And I think that's the first problem, right? And the labels are absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, like not really aligned with consumers, like consumers of music, because they're just not. Like I don't think their model requires them to be aligned, like completely aligned. So I think it's kind of like this antagonistic system. And the problem, I think, is that founders who should be figuring out where all the new music consumers are because that's the idea, right? Hey, I'm an artist, I'm making music. Hey, I'm a software developer. I'm going to find all of these places and all of these ways to distribute your music to consumers. Um, okay, that sounds great. Some of those ways might make your music less valuable, but it will make this other thing really valuable. And and then the next question will be, okay, how do I participate in that value? And I guess this is where the licensing conversation comes back in. But there may be some opportunities there that we can't reach from our existing position. And I think this is what I mean about founders end up having to play juice games, which is they have to end up participating in the status game that the major label paradigm creates around licensing and like getting in the door with the right person and making sure you have that right A&R like on speed dial, and they really like you to get the deal over the line. And they make you do all of that, which is like a complete waste of resources. And I think that's why I would always find that there's like you say that you're building a music startup, and there's kind of like a cold look, and like the air goes a bit silent because VCs think, oh, that means basically I might give you $100,000 and then $99,000 are going to go to the major labels, and then you've got $1,000 to try and build a startup.
Right.
So that's kind of the problem is, like, imagine you could just go into music and you could just permissionlessly innovate. You could just go and find customers, build a new app, build a new experience, put music in the experience, and let them use it. And actually, the kind of de facto stance, I think, and again, I'm saying this not that anyone has actually ever said it to me, but that the major labels kind of let this model persist because they say, like, you just go out there, you do what you want, right? And maybe you get some customers, and then you turn up to us and we strike a deal. Which means you technically have to operate in this like gray area where you may be doing something where you don't have a license for.
Right.
And I think that's fine. But think about if you said you can go and do things with music and no one's going to come after you. You can just go and do it. There's no like chilling effect on innovation. People just try stuff. Right. And that's where I think you find these really exciting opportunities. You can do like loads and loads of cool things, and you can innovate with music. That's what I really would love, is founders to have this freedom, I guess, in music, as much freedom as you enjoyed in some other parts of the market. And I think what you tend to find, at least that I found, at least I'm maybe an example of it, is like once you've done that once and you realize how many constraints you have in music, you just don't do it again. You're like, oh, okay, that was a bad idea. I won't do that again. I'll go work somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds lovely, and I feel like there would be a lot more exciting innovation if you didn't have this like giant wall in front of you.
Yeah.
And that almost becomes a non-starter. And why there is such this an expansive graveyard of music startups.
Yep.
So what is it you're doing through Juice now? Like what is the goal? What is the vision of the project now today?
So after spending a lot of time speaking to Dan and lots of other people about these ideas, and just, I guess, this feeling that we're always making progress. I think we're never really going backwards, and we're certainly not static. But there was almost like we're losing time. We're wasting time, and we could be doing so much better in music. And feeling like we as a collective of people, the people I've been speaking to, the people in my network, have all gone through this process, and then we watch loads of other founders go through the same one and kind of hit the same walls and not realize they're there, and spend lots of time on it, and maybe develop ideas that really aren't going to work, or require such a big element of luck or status that they don't ever end up being innovative. They just end up being like, I got this idea through the door because I knew the right person, for example. And so the way that we thought that the best way to change that would be to fund ideas that don't they kind of operate outside that paradigm. So they don't have the same limits. They're kind of free. And let's say there's most ideas will require you to go to the major labels and ask for a license. That's fine. But there's maybe a few of them that are that potentially don't have this issue. So you can do lots of things and you can scale them, because normally they can't scale. So lots of the big music stories in tech that aren't like Spotify, they're like maybe like Splice or something like that, or So Far Sounds. They're like these smaller businesses, right? But they struggle to scale without really butting into the big juggernauts like So Far Sounds. It butts into like Live Nation or like
Right.
yeah, exactly. And same with the Spotify or Splice. So I think this is the idea with Juice is just to say, how can we find all the ideas that exist outside that, like we call it the walled garden, the major label garden,
Mm-hmm.
that have this they have juice themselves. They have this kind of like self-perpetuating value stream. They can kind of keep growing without being limited. Um, can we organize those without without just running out of resources? Because I think if we, let's say we said, let's go and find people who want to invest in these startups, and let's say we raise a ridiculous amount of money, which I have no rights to be managing. Let's say it was like 50 million, 100 million, even more than that.
Mm-hmm.
We would probably just end up running out of money, because if
Yeah.
we invested in 100 startups, those ideas require people who have conviction to invest through like pre-seed, seed, Series A, all the way up. And I
Right.
think that would be very difficult for us to sustain on our own, and we probably just spin our wheels and end up running out of money. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea was, can we scale the thinking to coordinate enough people so that you get some of that effect, so you can prove it first, and then you could have people allocating capital across that framework without us having to do that ourselves. So it was almost taking this more measured, more long-term approach to trying to instantiate this new version of like a tech-forward music industry or a progressive music industry that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have the same trappings. That was the original idea, and what we're trying to do now is we're just trying to find ways of actually implementing that.
Right. Right.
The first one was a podcast, because podcasts at least give people access to some of the ideas. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just about to put out something new, which is like we're calling it, it's just called Fresh. Which is funny actually, because we started with the word juice, which was actually just, it was kind of like a pun. We used it because it was funny, and mapped into this like, you guys don't have juice phrase
Yeah.
that we're told. And now like all of the words that we use that relate to juice, they
They're
all sound
correlated.
so like cliche music industry, like fresh. I love that. I love this. Sounds so fresh. But it's very simple. It's just like a competition to for people to submit ideas and have them ranked according to a framework. And then that gives you like a score, and then you can see which ideas are like more juicy and less juicy, more disruptive, less disruptive. That's the idea.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of movement in general has been one of the more exciting things to me, across Web3, and just seeing like his sort of collective awareness that like it doesn't make sense for everyone to be doing these things in silos. And I guess this speaks to like, the ethos of decentralization at large, but just like operating as a solopreneur when there are, a bunch of other people. Why are we competing with these people trying to disrupt the exact same things in like very similar ways, rather than just like, why can't we collectively do this together with more
Mm.
resources, and we have much better odds of doing it? And this like sort of shift to a multiplayer game, I think is that's what feels most exciting to me, honestly.
Yeah.
Like in Web3 is like the shifted ethos, and like it gives me some more hope in humanity.
I agree. No, I completely agree there. It's you hope it. You hope, right? That's what we get. I think coordination is difficult. And I think that the obvious reason that you don't want to play ball in a group where you are a bit part of the innovation is then you don't get to capture all of the upside. And I think
Right.
that's what drives people. Right? I'm incentivized to do this because I get to capture all the outside. But I mean, I think this I think about this as more like 300. It's like saying, hey, we have 300 shots on goal. They have an army of 15,000.
Yeah.
But actually, if we just focus on that one area where they can only attack us like 300 men at a time, we actually have an advantage relative to them.
Right.
And I think that's it. It's more like concentrating the energy that's already there in a single spot. Even if we're all competing at the same spot, then at least we're not spending resources doing things that have no chance of pushing us forward. And that's really it. I think we're standing up on like a raised like platform, and we've got like flags, and we're like, go here, guys. Like, please
Yeah.
go over here. Don't
Yeah.
go over here. Go over there. Yeah,
This way.
yeah, this way.
Yeah. I mean, I get it that like the incentive of capturing all the upside is there, and like, but at the same time, I mean, there's like no better example to me, at least at least within the music industry, of just like seeing the way that a platform like Spotify operates, knowing how few people are actually making it, any money off of the platform. I think like 90, it's like the bottom 98.6% of artists are making like $36 per quarter, I think, from Spotify. And there's nothing we can do yet. At the same time, Daniel Ek, who, for those who don't know, is the CEO of Spotify, is putting down like $2 billion bids in Arsenal. It's like this upside is like so inequitable. Like these systems that we're perpetuating. I mean, even if you are like, say you're part of the 300 and you get like 1/300th of the upside instead of all of it. I mean, that's still an incredible incentive to push forward, and you get the opportunity to like work with the people and collaborate and like do something together. I mean, that sounds a little cliche, but like honestly, it just makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's this is I think I argued this somewhere recently. As we were saying at the beginning, because I'm context switching a bit, I'm like, where did I argue this? I'm sure I put this
Yeah, yeah, I get
in a
that.
post somewhere. But the way I think about it is, I actually don't really mind about Spotify making Daniel Lake very wealthy, and I don't really mind that it doesn't pay every artist, because I always say, you don't we don't look at other forms of work and then say, well, everyone who does this work should be getting paid the same amount. We're
Right.
actually okay to have like some people who earn a lot because they're very, very good, and some people who earn a lot less. But Spotify's earnings is not it's not Spotify. The earnings are a symptom. They're a reflection of the structure of the market,
Mm,
which is number one, like, people, like I would say, like the demand curve is invariant and it's like concentrated at the top, that most
mhm,
people like the music most other people like, so it's always going to have this
mhm,
inequity. um
right.
and also the problem is like it's very, very easy to make, or cheap, I say cheap to make music today. And so, if I go onto Spotify and I started a count tomorrow and I made like 3 songs, I've maybe made over 100 songs in my life. Let's say I uploaded all of them. I'm now an artist. I would be included in that, but I'm absolutely not an artist, right? Like I do all kinds of other things. And I don't make my main money from Spotify. So I think that the as we expand the definition of artist, it's important to kind of think through what that actually means. Like, how many of these people are professional, and like,
Mhm,
how many of them this is the main source of income. I don't pick up like I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't like start like putting bricks together on my lawn and then say I'm a bricklayer and expect a bricklayer salary, right? Like, it's
right.
like it's kind of this is like, I guess, the digital world is showing us like what work really is, and how it can work when anybody can freely access that kind of work provisioning services. So I think that's one
Mhm,
thing. And I think on my what what I think the problem is there is just that, the again, major labels are in the business of outliers, of flukes, right? Just like VCs, like we're in the business of flukes. Like we want the crazy takeoff artist, the crazy
yeah,
takeoff
yeah,
startup. That's the business they're in. So they're not
mhm,
incentivized to have every artist earn like a living wage. It's just, they're not in.
totally,
That's not the business they're in. And so that's why,
right.
I mean, Spotify reflects that. Now there are definite like arrangements of music where they don't have this concentration effect, or at least it's not as pronounced. And there's loads of businesses that maybe make it easier for smaller artists to earn a good amount of money. But that's absolutely not how the situation's been set up today. But I don't think it's
Mhm,
a reflection of how Spotify is structured, because the way that Spotify is structured really is a reflection of how consumers listen to music,
mhm,
how, and actually the recommendation algorithms of Spotify kind of undermine that concentration effect, right? Because they spread our listens out over things that we wouldn't normally listen to.
right.
Um, and the majors are they're pushing more marketing to try and concentrate our listening onto a smaller number of artists. So this is the ecosystem that's kind of in balance here. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like if you think about what a system designed without this concentrating effect of like big pools of money in the middle might look
Mhm,
like, it will obviously look a lot more distributed. It will look like people
right.
like kind of what they like. They like things that their local friends and social circles like, and maybe they like the stuff that's on, like, that they hear through the internet. But really, there's just like less of a concentration. Um, so yeah, so I think that's probably what we would move towards if you had some, like, if the this little Spartan army gets out there and actually like breaks through, and all these new models proliferate. I think it would look very different.
For sure, I agree. I mean, I I know a lot of people hate on Spotify. I do sometimes too, but I also recognize it as a symptom of a system that has existed, long before Spotify ever did. I guess my main beef is just like the huge disparity that is allowed to happen, not just in this instance, but I guess like the entire world round. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
and
absolutely.
but I also agree. And like one of the other points you touched on was just like thinking about there's it's much harder to differentiate between like the hobbyists and like professional artists because they're all presented in the same way on the same platform and essentially valued the same way, which makes it very difficult to break through, to cultivate community, to actually even get people to listen to your music.
Hmm.
um and of course, like one of the let's call it a Spartan army that has emerged is kind of the music NFT space as this alternative to the incumbent like streaming platforms and major labels. And I think you have some really interesting thoughts on music NFTs in regard to copyright and especially about keeping the music out of the music NFT, because otherwise it just ties people back into the same system of copyright that inevitably just kind of perpetuates itself. So I'm curious, if you could talk just a little bit about that, like your perspective there, and I guess like the potential that you see for the on-chain music ecosystem, or like advice that you would give to people building in this space to truly become a Spartan army.
I love it. So I guess the piece was written kind of as a reaction to what was happening at the time. I think there's a lot of excitement about music NFTs, um, and I just felt like it was again it was like me looking back on what we'd experienced with Jack, and also remembering that sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes it's useful to try the same thing multiple times because um, the environment changes all the time, and so
Mhm.
there might be a chance when something that didn't work last week starts to work.
Right.
But it was more me just standing up on like a platform and just kind of pointing a kind of an arrow saying maybe not this way but probably this way. And I
Mm.
the thing I wanted to communicate is that we are trying to escape from that system, not replicate that system.
Mhm.
um, when we were first building Jack, there were so many people saying, "Oh, you're building decentralized Spotify or decentralized SoundCloud," and I said, "There is no benefit to that, really. Like, why? What if the decentralization isn't like a goal in and of itself? Like, why
Mm.
does it need to be decentralized?" And I guess the point here is if we just recreate um, IP, right? We just recreate copyright. Then have we set artists free? And I think the point is like maybe that is good enough, and maybe that's fine. Like if I can go and I can just buy a piece of someone's copyright on chain really quickly, really easily, it suddenly means there's a new class of funders in the market who are willing to fund art, which is
Mhm.
great and it's useful. And I don't want to take anything away from anybody who believes that. But it was more just to say, remember that the thing we're like trying to build is not something that's there to like Spotify is not the enemy.
Mhm.
It's actually it is the funding mechanisms, and as soon as it's the funders, right? It's the major label system is actually the thing that people, when they speak about the problems in music and the inequity, that's largely what they're referring to.
Mhm.
And it was more to say, just remember that when you do that, you are reintroducing the major labels into your business model. You're reintroducing licenses into your business model. And if
Mhm.
you do have that connection, maybe it's unavoidable, right, with music NFTs. But just remember that you're now just rebuilding the licensing business,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And that was the point. I think it was important.
I agree. I mean, it really resonated with me, and I think there were some really interesting things happening that I mean aren't necessarily in Web3 related, but are happening sort of in similar in similar places. I think because of the ethos uh, that often comes with the people building in this space,
Mhm.
um, around like leveraging different types of licenses and like looking at like Creative Commons and things like that. And there are like some interesting value mechanisms and how you can use those as an artist um, to cultivate, I guess, IP in like a different type of way. And I guess I'm curious, but there's still like this, I think, oftentimes a misunderstanding, and there's still like this inherent tension between, say say like the blockchain, which is, or at least a lot of them, which are public and permissionless, with the idea of copyright, and like you almost need to explore, traditional IP when you think about like how you're building on chain. And I'm curious, like that's a difficult thing to reconcile, and I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on that and how you might approach trying to build something outside of the traditional IP, traditional copyright system that might be effective and artists who are oftentimes told like you need to own your shit, like that's what you need to do, like how you could get buy-in, from them as well.
Yeah, it's honestly it's a really difficult question. So maybe the way that I would approach it is I would say, what would be required to get artists and this is something I've kind of asked myself in the past. And actually, it's in the music NFT essay. It's like um, artists who just release like Creative Commons, like they just released CCO, and they basically have nullified the copyright in their work.
Hmm.
So let's say you had like a contingent of artists who just sign up to do that for life. Um, then you have this problem. You already are outside the protection of IP, right, of
Right.
intellectual property. Um, and so what do you do? So then I think you need to get creative. You need to think, okay, well, there's no government forcing people to pay me or forcing all proceeds from this asset to me. So what can I do? Anybody can use it, right? And I need another system to do certain jobs for me. And some of these jobs are done by IP, right? They're done by copyright. And I think it's just important not to forget that. And it's like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's important to not forget that there are so many valuable points here. But like the most important point is there becomes an incentive to create, an incentive to innovate, because you get to capitalize on the proceeds of your work. If I create an incredible song,
Mhm.
then anybody can use it, and they can
Right.
use it and they can capture upside from it that I can't. That is a problem, right? So you
Hmm.
have to solve that problem.
Hmm.
And then the question is, well, and this is what I would say is that um, IP was developed in a world where it's maybe it's quite easy to disassociate the creator of a work from the work itself. We live in a very hyper-connected world where it's actually fairly difficult, right?
Mm.
Um, I mean, and instantly what comes to mind is like you see on Instagram, it's of a video that you've seen on someone else's account or not, and then immediately there's someone saying credit please, and it's
Mm.
like the person has found the video, right? Like
Yeah.
um so I think that this is like maybe where you might be able to get rid of that and say, well, maybe if we always know the creator, then we can at least call out opportunists, right? People who are stealing work and are doing something with it. And also we can find people who are being satirical or people who are remixing and adding value, extending the value.
Mm.
And we have a mechanism for compensating those people as well. So I think this maybe gives you a completely different way of thinking about the problem of
Mm.
innovation, of creativity. Like how do you fund creativity? How do you fund innovation when you can't just like enforce made up property rights? Like you can't just enforce these rights that you're coming up with, that give that the creator a monopoly over those rights, especially where that's harmful to creativity and innovation in general. And that's why I'd say
Mhm.
we have this point with copyright at the moment, not just in music but also in other forms of art. You think about large copyright holders like Disney being one of them, who just continue to extend the life of copyright to make sure
Right. Right.
that they never cannot like reap the benefits of the IP they've created. We want them to do that. We want them to keep investing in IP creation. And it's this thing I say about the majors. Like, I love the major labels for like their investment in art, but they do it because there's a return.
Mm.
And the fact that there's a return
Right.
means that, and the way they capture their return means that they are not aligned with the people who enjoy music or create music, or the people who create art
Right.
or enjoy art. This is the
Right.
difficulty. So the perfect idea is people are releasing CCO music and they're getting paid. and they're incentivized to keep releasing CCO. People can do anything they want, right? That's the like holy grail. That's like where we're all trying to get to, and that's actually the connective tissue between the work I do with Juice and the stuff I'm still involved in on the side in music, and the stuff I'm doing on governance and DAOs, because the idea would be like, can you have something like a Uniswap, for example, that didn't have a fee? Like people can use it, they can trade tokens, and there's no fee. They just use it as if it's like free, right? But then it's valuable for people to fund the creation of Uniswap, which still takes money. You still want people to want to make Uniswap.
Right.
So that's it. That's the holy grail.
Yeah, that's the holy grail. That's the holy grail. How do we align all of the incentives in the same direction?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that seems like a good place to pause. We'll leave it open ended. All who are listening, please go find that holy grail.
Yes, please. Let me know when you find it.
Yeah. And I just have one more question for you, Vaughn, that I ask everybody at the end of these. You're going to a desert island and you get to bring 3 albums with you. What are they?
I mean, immediately Thriller.
Nice.
It's I had a copy of that album on tape, and
Nice.
and when I was very, very young, and I listened to it until the tape like wore thin. And I'd I think every now and again I'd put the tape back in the tape recorder and press play, knowing it wouldn't play. I was so excited. I actually was thinking earlier on that it's something I never do now. Just like that love of just listening to a piece of music by itself, like just by itself with nothing else. So that would be Thriller. Another album that I would take is Subtract's first album, which is like mostly Sampha, which I love.
It's a good record.
Incredible album. And then it gets tough. What my next record be? It probably would be something Japanese. It probably would be like the Yellow Magic Orchestra first album with Rydeen on it. That would be a great album to take.
Cool. It's a good trio.
Yeah.
Cool, Vaughn. This has been amazing. For people listening who want to follow along or get involved with some of the work that you're doing, where's the best place that they can do that?
So I'd definitely say follow me on Twitter, where I do not tweet, so that's great. Vaughn MCK. I also have a Substack, which is Scarce Objects Substack, scarceobjects.substack.com. I think those are the best places, and also the place I'm working. The thing I'm working on now mostly is Butter, and you can find that at buttery.money. That's where to find me.
Cool. All right. Cool. Well, thanks again, Vaughn. This was amazing. Really enjoyed the conversation. You could keep talking about all this stuff for days.
Yes, of course, always. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at decential.io. And remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.